Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. Through our first bleed to our last, we come to know ourselves more deeply. This is a platform to reclaim the sacredness of all of it. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach, specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hey, women. Welcome back. I'm laughing because I'm just sitting here at 8:11 p.m. in the kitchen with my red light, blue blocking glasses on. And seconds before I hit record, thinking, am I really going to put out the intro to this episode like this? And then it's like, yeah, I am. I don't normally work at night like this. I'm generally like a pretty early bird in the morning, and so I like to get to bed early at night. Usually start winding down at like 7:30 after dinner, and so this is a unique scenario, but I'm on day 13 of my cycle, a lot of energy, and the day I'm recording this actually is the spring equinox, and it's just been a really interesting day for me. I don't know. I think maybe some of you can relate to this sense of we think we're supposed to feel a certain way on these days. Like spring equinox, the energy is like play and lightness and rebirth. And there's definitely been some of that for me with this season. And it's not just the one day, it's the whole time around the first day of spring, the weeks before, the weeks after. And I definitely do feel like that. There is a lightness coming in. My inner child is wanting to play more and wanting to be outside more. And maybe you feel that too. But I also think it's kind of awkward and messy, the transition between seasons. It's like, one foot in winter, one foot in spring. And how do we do this again? And I think it can also bring up, the energy is shifting. The energy is shifting from winter energy to spring energy. And so it can bring up this unsettled energy within us. And I've definitely felt that today. There's been a lot going on that's allowing me to feel a bit unsettled. And so today has been just kind of a funky day. I haven't been in my routine at all, which I guess is perfect, the shifting. And the kind of funkiness actually created a lot of space for me to just take care of myself today. And that's really what I did until this moment when I decided to come on here and finish recording this episode. But yeah, I did a Yoni steam ceremony today for the spring equinox, actually with Kitara, with Kit, who is the guest today. Kit owns Kitara, which is a company that makes Yoni steam supplies. So Yoni steam, beautiful wooden boxes and seats, all kinds of different blends, pots, gowns to steam in, cushions, like everything to make it the most luxurious setup possible. Unfortunately, I don't have my steam seat with me right now because I'm in Hawaii, but the ceremony was so beautiful and really, really dropped me into my body quite deeply. Um, and just brought up this sense of wanting to just be myself. That's kind of what's coming up for me here. And so that's why I'm coming to you with these red light glasses in my kitchen at 8:14 p.m. and I'm drinking my chamomile tea with some of my motherwort tincture. Actually, it's motherwort elixir. It has honey in it too. And there's actually plenty of those still on my website. A lot of stuff I sold out before I left for Hawaii, but motherwort is still available. I made a ton of it because it's just such potent medicine for times of overwhelm, which I had a bit of today. And that gentle, like, mother hug. And even though I'm not back on the mainland, as they say here, to ship you motherwort, my mother is. So just know that she will be packaging your orders with love if you place them. But yeah, one thing that has been coming up for me is really wanting to just be myself and let go of any identities of like Natalie, the podcast host, Natalie, the womb teacher, Natalie, the spiritual person. I'm just Natalie. And I really want to share that with you all. And I'm figuring out how to do that in the way that feels best to me. Because to be honest, sometimes it's hard to be yourself online. And I say that with gentleness and love because there's this push of like authenticity. And I know that I personally am still navigating like what feels right to share online and what do I want to keep to myself and which parts of me. Yeah. Yeah, gosh, it's just such a journey. And so I appreciate you all being with me on it and being here to share in other women's stories of them working on showing up authentically in online spaces too. Kit is on the podcast today, as I mentioned. And if you're interested in any of her Yoni Steam supplies, I'll say this right now so you can write it down. Kit has been so generous as to give us a 10% off discount on her site. So you can use code MOONBABYLOVE for 10% off. And that is in the show notes. In the show notes, you'll also find links to Kit's Instagram, my Instagram, and a couple offerings I have. Intentional Maidenhood began well, it will have begun 2 days after or 2 days before. Gosh. Nobody let me record at 8 p.m. ever again. It'll have begun 2 days earlier once this recording starts, but we are keeping the doors open, Laura and I, for about a week after the program begins so that you can jump in on that week one content and join us for a live call every Monday. Intentional Maidenhood is the program to uplevel your life. It's everything Laura and I have to offer from my teachings on cyclical living, the fertility awareness method, womb healing practices, healing any sort of cycle imbalances, hormonal challenges, just like being in vibrant health from a lot of different angles. And then Laura's genius, which is really supporting you and going in on your purpose and discovering your passions and what you're good at and really allowing yourself to build a life centered around those things. She's so good at that. Yeah, so I'm really excited for the program to start. And the other thing I'll mention is our retreat in Peru. So we're really excited. We've got about one, two, three, four, five women who are joining us. We've got 12 spots. So 7 more spots. Am I doing that math right? Yeah, 7 more spots available. This is the Nourished and Thriving Women's Retreat in Peru. There's going to be delicious meals, sacred sites in Peru, hugs, fireside circles and songs, massages. I'm going to lead some Yoni steam ceremonies. We are going to be doing workshops, making you such nourishing meals. And we will also be having a naked day, which is something I'm really excited about. I mean, talk about just being yourself with other women. It's going to be a full day. We're going to be massaging each other. We're going to have do this at the end of the retreat, so you'll know the women really well by then. But yeah, this is just going to be such an impactful time. And it's in May. I should have mentioned that, May 19th to 26th. And I'm just getting so excited to go to Peru. I've never been there. And to be able to have in-person connection with these women and maybe you, if you feel the call to come too. As always, you can join the Cyclical Living Circle membership. That's how you can go deeper on all the teachings of this podcast and connect with us on twice monthly calls, as well as a forum to ask any questions you might have. Links to book one-on-one sessions with me if you want a specific solution or protocol is in the show notes. And yeah, I hope you all are having a beautiful start to spring. So let's get on to the show. In this episode, we welcome Kit, a passionate creator of Yoni Steam supplies, to explore the transformative practice of Yoni steaming and her journey from being a fierce advocate of sexual assault prevention, doing that type of work, to embracing the gentleness of Yoni steaming and pleasure-based practices, especially pleasure-based sex education. So Kit shares her personal journey of womb awakening and how Yoni steam became a foundational part of her spiritual practice. We dive into Kit's conception journey, her experience as a quote, older mother, and the importance of supporting women's health through gentle, nourishing practices. This inspiring conversation provides deep insights into menstrual health, sexual education that again is pleasure-based rather than fear-based, and the many benefits of Yoni steaming, all woven into the tapestry of Kit's amazing story. Y'all, she's truly a wonderful woman, and I know you all are going to absolutely fall in love with her, just like I did. So let's get on to the show. All right. Hi, Kit. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with me.
No, it is truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And for those of you listening, Kit and I were just chatting about this before we hit record, but she makes Yoni steam supplies like seats and blends and cushions. And many of you who listen to this podcast know that Yoni steaming was really like my womb awakening. And Kitara, the steam seat from Kitara, has been like my companion. And even as I like travel nomadically, it takes up much space in my car because it is a must anywhere I go. So I'm just so grateful to you, Kit, and your creations.
Well, thank you so much. That's such a beautiful visual.
Yeah.
See the seat always coming with you by your side.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. I just traveled to Mexico with the seat, so I've been
Oh my gosh,
traveling.
it's really a necessity.
It is. I know while we were chatting, I'm still sitting with like aiming is the foundational core of my spiritual practice. I think that was what you said.
Yeah.
And I so resonate with it and really claiming the depth of our devotion, our awareness, our understanding of what it is to us. It then from that space, it makes sense, right? That we'd be taking the seats, that we'd be taking the things that allow us to do it. And so, yeah, just you dropping in that like one sentence, I was like, there it is. I don't think I'd redistilled it quite so succinctly, but
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah. No, thank you for receiving it and reflecting it back because I mean, I think for me, like my just relating to my cycle and my womb, that's how the lens through which I view the world. And steaming is just the practice of really intentionally dropping into that connection. It opens you up and brings you into your womb's energy. And it's both a release and a filling. And
Mhm.
I mean, there's just so much to it. And I'm sure we could just go on and on about that. But
I love it. I
yeah.
love it. This is good. This is great. Like fun. And like now yeah, let's have a little bit of that exhale. I get it. I'm with you.
Totally.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. It's like the
beautiful.
beauty of the cycle. Yeah. So tell me about like
Life
your.
cycle. Yeah, I am definitely in mother in so many ways. And I'm also in an interesting place of being somebody who's 43 with two kids under the age of 3 and knowing that I'm in like when I am going to be a mother of small children, I'm actually entering into more of the crone sage space. So it's that overlap that I feel, and I feel really grateful for the opportunity of that. It feels like the journey here definitely had some moments of real struggle, which made me fearful that something was wrong or broken around being an older mom. And now I'm in this really sweet space of understanding the path a little bit more and feeling in that understanding a lot of gratitude for where I am now because I am in a place where I feel much more resourced to mother than I would have been at any other time in my journey. So that feels really beautiful and great for me
Mhm.
personally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's so inspiring because I think there's so many women who do crave to be mothers and they're in their late 30s, early 40s and it hasn't happened for them yet and they might feel
Yeah.
discouraged or like they're behind and it's really just such a testament that that's not actually real,
Yeah.
that everyone has their own unique timing on coming into motherhood and like how amazing to come into that season of life feeling resourced to do so. I can think of no
Mhm.
better way.
Yeah, exactly. And it is challenging. The reality is that in our culture, we're telling people in their early 30s that they might be considering motherhood too late. And it's just really wild. And I'll just share that my conception journey might come up in more depth, but just to
Mhm.
ping it here, that one really powerful moment for me in my journey was realizing that both my grandmothers on my maternal and paternal side had pregnancies in their early 40s in the 1950s. And
Wow.
so it was just like, right. And that wasn't like hundreds of years ago. These are grandmothers I grew up with. They're my grandmothers. And
Yeah.
so, and it wasn't like my mother had any fertility issues. She just happened to have my brother at 27 and me at 30. Like it, and maybe she would have had another child. Those women weren't using any form of birth control, my grandmothers. So that was just really helpful, and I've shared with people to look back and to see examples that they can ground in, that this isn't some wildly new phenomenon, and
Yeah.
it's also not something particular to me, that I'm this like outlying person. The real truth of the matter is, if you are having healthy menstrual cycles, you're fertile.
Yeah.
A healthy menstrual cycle
Right.
is an ovulatory phase completed by the shedding of the menstrual lining. That's the
Yeah.
definition of a menstrual cycle. So if it's healthy, you're fertile, you're
Mm.
ovulating, you're menstruating. So
Yeah.
anyway, that was like this interestingly and powerful aha moment, because I was feeling really clear that for me personally, I wasn't called to certain fertility treatments. And then I was like, these weren't even available, let alone like what were needed to produce aunts and uncles on both sides.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love that about going to your grandmother's. I feel like the
Mhm.
ancestral imprints for us, that's so beautiful. And it is interesting too to think about like reproductive technology and how I think that while I think it's almost pushed on women that are in their late 30s or in their 40s as that's your option. And
Mhm.
I love your story because and I'm sure we're going to get into that, but that's actually not your only option. And like you said, if you're having a healthy menstrual cycle, like there's no reason you shouldn't be able to conceive.
Right, right.
And that
And
also like, go ahead.
it's not very, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's also not very uncommon, or it, it is normal and healthy to have healthy menstrual cycles into your late 40s,
Yeah.
right? So how can we hold that? We know that. And then we say that your fertility is going to drop off a cliff at 30. Like we just all need to take a
Yeah.
beat and take what we know
Yeah.
and see that some other narrative is taking hold here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you are as fertile at 45 as you are at 30, but it doesn't mean that, you aren't somehow fertile.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I mean, it just reminds me of all the ridiculous things that we hear. Geriatric mom at age 35.
So I had my first baby 2 days before I turned 41.
Mhm.
So I was 40. So I was in the bracket of 35 to 40. So that was coded as geriatric. And
Yeah.
then my second baby I had 2 months before I turned 43. So I was in a new bracket of 41 and up. And they wouldn't even tell me what the code was. Like, and my husband was like, "What do you mean?" Because this woman was like mumbling, "Oh, I hate this code." And my husband had to ask, "What is it?" She's like, "It's elderly pregnancy or something." It was something like beyond. And I was like,
I've
"Up
never
with
heard
this
that.
stuff." I was like, "There's a code beyond the geriatric." Like I'm
I
in
had no
some
idea there was one beyond they're like ancient pregnancy.
ancient pregnancy at 42. You know what I mean? It's not like I wasn't 62.
No, oh my gosh. I mean,
So
it's so silly, right? Because none of that is real. And also it's
none of
like
it's real. None of
putting
it's
women in boxes when like every woman is so different, like
real.
some women
Yeah.
might have trouble conceiving in their mid 30s and other women might have no trouble conceiving in their mid 40s. Like it's
Right.
just
Right.
like very individual. And I also think there's
Yeah.
so much capability for us to preserve our fertility and to heal our fertility like for as long as we can, because I believe that our ovulation and our eggs are very responsive to changes that we make and, on
Yes.
so many levels,
Yes.
right? Like mind, body,
Yes.
soul levels.
Okay. Because you said that.
Yes. What are you thinking?
So there's this image, and in some ways it's so cool and so beautiful, and in some ways I find it deeply problematic, which
Mm,
is of like a pregnant belly with then a little, image of a baby, and then an arrow into that baby's womb
mm,
saying, this was you in your
Oh,
grandmother's
yes, I've seen that.
womb, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was thinking this because my second baby is a girl. And so I was like, okay, so my granddaughter is in me. Right. And so for me, that was like so beautiful to extra love up, or, not that
Yeah.
I like loved up that pregnancy anymore, or less than my first, but, it's just that extra joyous moment.
Yeah.
And what I find can be limiting when that is just something that we scroll past is that it feels like things are much more predetermined than they actually are. Right.
Mm,
So, yes, when I gave birth to my daughter, she has inside of her all the genetic material that she will use to have children if she chooses to. But she also has all of the codes to understand how to optimize that or not. She has a lot of say
yeah.
into how her fertility is supported or not, right?
Yeah.
It's like all predetermined by me. And it's not all eggs. Her eggs aren't all inside her. All the genetic material to create her eggs are.
Mm,
Those are
mm.
really different. And thank you for allowing me to get on my soapbox about
No, I love it. I think
that.
that's really an important thing. And I think it goes for most health things because I think there's a lot of talk about, like the genetic material we get passed on, right? Which, if you know about like TCM and stuff, there's this idea of Jing, like the sort of genetic material that we come into this world with. And one of my teachers, my mentor, actually, Kristen Hauser, she often talks about how there's some schools of thought that like you all only have whatever Jing you come into this life with. So whatever was passed on from your grandmother to your mother to you is that's it. But she said that there's a growing school of thought that she's kind of part of that you can actually replenish your Jing and optimize, kind of like you said, optimize that genetic material by the way that you live your life. And I think that's a way better way to look at it. And that's what I believe to be true.
It feels so much more truthful in my body,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
just isn't prefixed in the way that current conversation about DNA is like locking us into. And so it just feels like when we really like breathe into the womb space, like she is there holding abundance.
Mhm.
So it feels not likely that it's actually like all predetermined multiple
Yeah.
generations back from a root of fear-based thought. It's just
Yeah.
that tracks a lot less than the fact that there is genetic material passed on, and then we really get to be engaged in informing how it is expressed.
Mm. Mm.
So
That's like a fascinating conversation. I love that we got into this. It does bring me to what I want to talk about next, just thinking about like genetic imprints and young girls especially is I love to ask women about their first bleeds. So
yeah,
and you were
yeah,
saying before
thank
you're like,
you.
wow, I don't think I've ever shared that. So I'm curious to hear
I am
first
like
bleed.
blown away by that. I mean, I have been in the world of women's health and wellness for a pretty long time, about
Yeah.
22, 25 years. So, and I've talked about everything from solo sex for manifesting your dream life to let's re-envision adult entertainment from a feminist perspective to a Yoni steam suit should be in every home across
Yeah.
the land. And I'm like, no one's ever asked me about my first bleed. This is so interesting. So thank
I
you
love
for
that.
doing such thought leading work. And I do think about it a lot because I have some grief and sadness around the missed opportunity. And so it was late summer. I was about to go into the sixth grade. So I was 11. And I was staying at a friend's house on Cape Cod. And I went to the bathroom and was really confused and thought that I had basically like a diarrhea, like poop in my pants because it was
Oh,
so much darker than what
yes, it's
I
dark.
thought.
The first
Yeah,
one's
so
dark.
dark. So that's really what I remember. And I remember being really scared to tell my friend's mom, and she was lovely about it, but I just remember that feeling of being uncomfortable, and I'm not really sure why. I think it's interesting. At the time, I was 1 year into an all-girls school. My mom had told me about that I would get my period. I did call her. She was very lovely about it, but I just kind of was in that like confused sort of a little bit of I'm really trying to feel into. I remember it so, I mean, I really remember the bathroom I was in and the
Wow.
underwear and everything. And so I feel like I remember the feeling of, oh no, and so that's where I feel the sadness. And though I'm so grateful that there was no shame, there was also this absence of celebration or reverence
Yeah.
or feeling like I was stepping into a different depth of belonging, the things that I carry and hope and hold to have be different for my daughter and her friends and for other young maidens around our communities because it is so cool and it's so special. And so, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting because I've noticed a lot of women who I interview, like some of them do have a lot of imprints of shame, which is
Mhm.
so, I mean, it's so common and so unfortunate. But for the ones
Yeah.
who don't, even though there's not necessarily like a shame feeling like gross or something, they speak to the same thing you spoke to of just a
Mhm.
lack of this is an important milestone in your life. And this
Yeah.
is your first rite of passage, And it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting that I think even from a young age, we kind of know that in some way we're looking for it to be reflected back to us as like a powerful moment. And when that doesn't happen, like what I hear from your story is you were just a little bit lost and like, wait, what?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's because we
Yeah.
really need that holding as young girls, the like modeling.
Right. Thank you. Because I think I so resonate with what you're saying and the reflection. And it's okay. Yeah, I guess I do need some materials. But then
Yeah.
I think I was aware that was feeling really incomplete. Like,
Yeah.
is this really all there is to acknowledge it? And I wasn't even conscious to celebration. I'm sure I wasn't, but I have known over the years at times where I'm like, this response doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah.
Nothing's bad, but like, why is this how we're talking about this? And
Yeah.
it's what's bringing up for me and remembering it is really how I felt sexual education was. It
Hmm.
just felt like it was all oriented from the wrong root. It was like how not to get pregnant, how not to be assaulted, which is still a very problematic viewpoint in
Yeah.
10,000
Super
different
weird.
ways, right? And there was nothing, right? So how not to get an STI, how not to get assaulted, and how not to get pregnant. That was really what good quote unquote sex education was in the 90s. I think if anything, it's gotten more problematic. And it was years later that I was like, wait, the whole thing is oriented incorrectly. That's important information to have, but that's a spoke that comes out of like pleasure and why we want to be having sex and what
Yeah.
we're really holding for a positive
Mhm.
experience to be. And none of that was
Mm.
even presence in any sort of my quote like educational conversations. And I think that sort of tracks with menstruation. Like I knew the biology of it, although my awareness of the four phases of the cycle, honestly, I can't believe I learned in my like early 30s.
A lot
It
of
just
women
like
do.
it, I I remember that's another thing. I remember which dining room table I was sitting at when I was reading Elizabeth D's book. And I was just like, how am I learning this at 33 years old? Like
Yeah.
I went to an all-girls school from age 10 to 18. I like I have a
Uh,
master's in gender studies. This is wild that
yeah.
like these ovulation and menstruation, but then we're missing the whole discussion if we miss the four phases and their overlap and everything else. So anyway,
Yeah.
thank you. I think you're seeing where you're helping me understand too is that I just understood that there was a lot more, but of course I was 11. I didn't know how to ask or even to name that or even really
Yeah.
aware that I was aware that something was missing from simply being asked, what pads do you need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, wait, but this entire thing about me has changed. What do I
Yeah.
do now? Like, who am I?
Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
so much on what you just said. The four phases thing is interesting. I was reflecting recently, like, I actually just read an Instagram post about this, about how until I was like, I mean, I'm 28 now, and I think I learned about the phases of my cycle when I was 23. So I was a little bit younger,
Right.
which I'm grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was also mind blowing for me. But to be honest, until my 20s, I just had no idea even when my period was going to come. I wasn't
Mhm.
even tracking my
Exactly.
cycle. It was just like my period would come and it's like, ah, shit, you know?
Yeah.
No, and I'm just, when I think about that now, I'm like, that's so crazy that I just had no context that I was constantly moving through this cycle. And then it wasn't just like
Yeah.
random when I would start bleeding, like this random
Mhm.
inconvenient thing. And that's how most
Mhm.
girls grow up. And it's just absolutely
Mhm.
wild. It feels like menstruation and birth are this like final frontier in like women's work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
it's so,
Just and the consciousness that can be unlocked. And then you realize that you've been living for years, if not decades, without this awareness that is truly
yeah.
life changing because it shifts your whole perspective and ability to have connection with how you're moving through the world, you know?
Yeah. Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like how you're moving through the world. When I have, sometimes I'll have a longer cycle and ovulate later or something like that, can be normal if something's going on, you get sick, something stressful. And when I'm like not sure exactly where I am in the cycle, like not sure when I'm going to ovulate, so not sure when I'm going to bleed, these days, that's kind of stressful for me.
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
and of course I have trust and faith in my body, but it's, wait, but where am I in time and space? Like it's such a
Mhm.
grounding thing to know where you are in time and space, which you do by knowing where you are in your cycle.
Yeah, I so resonate with you with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really grounding. Yeah.
Yeah. And the piece that you shared on sex education too is an interesting topic to explore because I find that when I ask women about their first bleeds and then we're okay, what comes next? Normally it's something around sex ed, having sex, birth control, that sort of realm of things that comes, a little bit later in our puberty years.
Mhm.
And the way you said it, like the way that it's framed, I haven't heard really anyone share that, but it's true. It's framed around don't do these things and repressing the connection you have to your body, which is the same as what happens at menstruation. Just pretend like it's not happening. When
Mhm.
it's like you can teach, what if we were teaching young girls like how to track their cycles? Because then they're learning when they're fertile, but seeing it as a beautiful thing, not as like a
Right.
cut off your fertility. Like, how weird is that?
Mhm. It's it is beyond weird. It's really, I think, it is the counter to what we're talking about of how empowering, how grounding, how nourishing it is to know where you are in your cycle. To
Yeah.
not is to be disoriented,
Hmm.
right? And so we are disorienting women and girls by not allowing this level of understanding to be celebrated and placed as a really foundational piece of our education. And yes, you're right. I mean, with the sex ed stuff, it's we just focus on what we don't want to happen and what we can prevent. And there is no orientation to really what we do want. And that is there's a thread there connecting to menstruation of we're just going to focus on how you can push through and do everything like you aren't part of this cycling body tribe that you are. you know, so, so it's
Yeah.
again, it's just focusing on things from a perspective of shutting down and what you don't want to have happen, which is that you don't want to not be able to do something while you're bleeding. That's you know, I think it's just this interesting thing of do I believe that I love this is a wider conversation, Natalie, but I in so much reverence for the second wave feminism of the 1970s and 80s and all that I am able to do and express and speak to. And it is very much time for us to own the mistakes and damages of that movement and to build and expand upon them. And, what I'm thinking of is that slogan of I can do anything a man can, even while bleeding, or something like that. I'm getting
Yeah.
it kind of wrong, right? And yeah, of course you can. That's coming from that energy of that moment where women were literally told they weren't allowed in a workforce because they lived in a bleeding body. So that slogan in that context tracks for me. But
Yeah.
now that we're using it, it needs to shift, it needs to evolve. to be like, great, now we can open the bank accounts that we couldn't open in the 70s. We don't have to fill out pink application forms anymore for certain jobs, at least for making 70 cents on the dollar for white. We still have a lot way to go. But but we don't need to pretend that we are the same every day in the workforce or in our families or in our friendships and our social lives. We aren't. We get to now be expanding upon that movement. And I think the huge opportunity here is to claim that and to say, of course, I can give that presentation by shutting down my body and pushing through while bleeding, but why? My magic is really going to come online again in a couple of weeks. And so let's schedule where we can in that way.
Yeah.
And so, and again, that's focusing on like, how do we celebrate? How do we harness the power of this cycle? And
Mm.
from that orientation, we can just see so many incredible things. You may have spoken to this before, but like the women's US soccer team, they train according to their cycles and they're the best athletes in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is what we do when we actually see the perspective of the truth of the cycle being a gift. If you honor it, it gives you all sorts of magic and power and strength. If you don't, there
Yeah.
are usually some side effects and you get burnt out and adrenal fatigue and everything else. So
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I had no idea about that with the women's soccer team. That's so
yeah,
inspirational. And
it's
like,
so
yeah,
cool. It's so cool.
they're
Yeah, they
like
have
so
their
cool.
coaches always know what day of the cycle they're on. Makes
That's
so much sense,
amazing.
right? And they
Yeah.
do different training protocols depending.
Of
Like,
course.
of course, right? And they don't not play players if they're bleeding, right?
Yeah.
Like back to the slogan of like, sure, you can. And you have to live in like the world, like it's a team sport, right? Like
Yeah.
all of those dynamics. But when you're training, you can make it's not overly complicated in a way
Mhm.
that, this current culture has made it seem like somehow you couldn't possibly be so complex as to know what days your athlete are in your cycle. Of course you can.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it brings up what you said brings up two thoughts for me. The first being like, often women will ask me, like, when I spend time resting on my bleed, or like I enter slowly back into creation after my bleed and I start slowing down, like we were sharing in the luteal phase. A lot of women are like, but how do you do that? What if are you not going to get stuff done? Like, how could you take that much time off? And I understand that I have my own business. And so it's a bit different for me than someone who like works in the workforce. But I am so much more productive than I ever was in my life. I accomplish so much more. I'm so much more inspired and creative living in tune with my cycle because the cycle gifts you that. Whereas, like you said, if you're just trying to go all the time, it's going back to what we were at the beginning. If we were just like constantly trying to act like we were in that rising estrogen state forever, we would burn out, of course. Like we have this gift of the slow down, the letting go, so that
Mhm,
those like
mhm.
that first little bit of the cycle, those first 2-ish weeks, maybe a little longer, you're just like so inspired and you can just go hard and you accomplish so much more than if you tried to be that 24/7 superwoman all the time.
So much more.
Yeah.
I'm just in another layer of awareness of the truth of that, having come on. It's just, you accomplish so much more. It's just epically more because you're coming from this aligned place, this aligned
Yeah.
and nourished place. And so,
Yeah.
what I'm finding is that I also don't have to redo things as much. Like right? Like I don't need to further explain or shift. It's no, I waited, I slowed down enough to really wait to hear and understand and work intentionally and know that this is the next step. And that is like unlocks actually an incredible speed to things, I find.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, what you shared about that second wave of feminism in the 70s. And I think that's something that is like a pretty big topic, at least in the circles that I'm in. I see that being talked about a lot as, down with feminism. And I get what people are saying because, like, of what you said. Yeah, like we should honor our cycles and honor birth. And yes, we are women and we are different than men. But it's also it's refreshing to hear you say there's to have so much respect for that because we needed that stepping stone. Like we needed that stepping stone of, hey,
Very grateful
women are
for it.
people too. um, in order to women are people too, and we can be powerful as women and not like only in the context of the masculine experience of when, a 24-hour hormonal clock.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yes, I sometimes get a little bit like defensive and protective of the way that movement and some of those women are talked about, because there was a lot of really beautiful, important work there that I benefit from almost every moment of my life.
Yeah.
And there's also something that alerts my spidey senses anytime anybody is standing for women's liberation, is putting blame out there on other women. I'm
Mm,
just,
yeah.
I feel like we're missing something here, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can we learn? I got to step back and zoom in and step back and zoom in, because that can't be right. Right. And so I say so sincerely. I hope and hold that my nieces and my daughter and my son too, that they in 30 years, think, I can't believe how limited you were, how conservative you were, how, your movement of expanding liberation was so outdated. I'm like, great.
That would be awesome.
Build upon it, go forth.
Yeah. Whole point. I love that.
So,
Such, yeah, like an evolved consciousness way of looking at it. Yeah, outdo me.
outdo me. I'm all for it.
That's
And I
amazing.
honor my mom and my grandmothers for giving me that toolkit and or that blueprint as well. I mean, that's definitely how I feel. My mother, who was, in investment real estate in the 70s, she was the only woman in boardrooms, and my defensiveness and protectiveness of that whole movement definitely comes from the defensiveness and protectiveness of her in it, and knowing what she sacrificed and what she endured to have it be now that there are so many women in spaces that there weren't, but also now to know her support of me and the work that I do, and to really so often say, wow, yeah, we were not thinking about it that way, but right, that makes sense. Like,
Aw,
okay, cool.
so
Right. So
sweet.
I hope I get to have those conversations with.
Oh, absolutely.
uh,
I mean, it'll be so cool to see, especially your daughter grow up and like,
Yeah, yeah.
what life is like for women then.
Yeah, exactly. I actually, a couple of weeks ago, I had this vision drop through, and it was so beautiful. And basically, what I ended up texting some friends was, I was like, oh, I think my ultimate goal is that I'm living in a little cottage on the water, and people come to me, surrounded by like herbal medicine and flowers and animals. And people come to me to ask what it was like when women birthed in hospitals.
Just on that topic, I mean, yeah, that would be amazing. They're like, wait, what? People
Right,
did that?
right. They're
That's
like,
crazy.
will you tell me about the old weird days where women birthed in hospitals? And I'll be like, sit around, make some tea. Let me tell you.
I love that. I'm in this phase right now, like where when I meet people, like whoever I meet, is sometimes when you like meet people and you're like living a bit of an alternative lifestyle compared to the mainstream and you like meet people out in public, you've got to test the waters a little bit. So I'm in this phase where like one of the first things I'll say to a new friend or something, if I'm trying to feel them out, I'll be like, oh yeah, like, well, I would never give birth in a hospital and just see how they respond to that.
It's your opening line. I love it.
And sometimes they're like, yeah, and other times they're like,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's a good tester.
Well, it
Uh,
is. And I was married for a year and a half before I said to my husband, I'm not giving birth in a hospital. And we laugh now, but he was like, absolutely, you are. And there were just a few moments in our marriage where I've like looked at him and like, who just came over you? That's like, that was funny. Some weird
yeah.
old
Like, what was
thread of
that?
wiring came through. I was like, so is it moved? Is it shifted? Are you back?
Um,
Because that's not going to work with me on any
like weird
level.
programming.
Weird, right?
This
Um,
brings me to an interesting question around, and if there's something you need to say before this, go ahead. But what I was going to ask is to just kind of bridge the gap a little bit of obviously now you're this woman like really embodied in, your cycle and you've had two children and you live this like quite connected to your body life. so, we talked about your first bleed, and I often ask women what their like early cycling years were like. And then like kind of most women, their early cycling years are characterized by a bit of disconnection to their body. And so I like to hear like how that was and then what shifted for you.
Yeah, beautiful. I'll just close that of my husband is a huge advocate of
Yeah.
me and the work I do, and now is like a huge advocate for home birth. So that's
Beautiful. I think also
yeah,
we kind of
just to
have to
leave
teach
that.
the men because it's not embodied knowing for them.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
we can teach everybody, and
Yeah.
it's so many, it's slow journey with a lot for me of deep breathing. And I've been thrown all sorts of, all of us are, thrown other people's fears and projections and
Yeah.
all of that. And so it's just really holding that's coming from them, and we can navigate and lead and just show people where honestly, even though they tend to think that I'm ignorant, at the end it's usually like, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. So but I think, yeah, I definitely resonate with feeling very disembodied for most of my early cycling years. I was like you in that, like, I would just bleed. Actually, I would get a little bit of lower back pain,
Mhm.
and then I would understand that I was going to start bleeding. And that was my rhythm for from 11 to my late 20s. And then I started traveling in some really beautiful circles of women talking about embodied living with your cycle and
Wow.
eating and experiencing sex and exercise in connection with your cycle. And that just unlocked so much for me. There were like pings of that. And then I think it was in my early 30s where I really came to understand the hormonal shifts and how we could support that through food, movement, and sex. And that was huge. And I look back and I think like my world would have been really different had I had that knowledge earlier in my life. And I'm also really glad that I had it as early as I did, because I think lots of women, it never really comes online. So, so ping me back to some of the specific questions within that, and I'm happy to share more.
Yeah. I mean, you got the crux of it, which was just like, what happened? Like, when did you come home to your body? So I'm curious, like, how did you get involved in these circles of women? What were you seeking? Did it
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah, so it is inner knowing, which I don't think I've ever traced back to the first bleed until this
Mm.
conversation. But I definitely had this inner knowing in high school that we were not being told the correct things about our bodies with sex. And yet my frame at that time was aware that I was only being told like fear-based things, but not yet able to see what an alternative would be. So it was just, so I was scared
Yeah.
because all my sex ed had been about STIs, unwanted pregnancies, and assault.
Fear. Yeah.
So I went to college really scared, particularly of sexual assault. It was the late 90s. There were at that point an occasional news article or an occasional article in the newspaper every August, September time about the incidence of sexual assault on college campuses. That was sort of starting around then. And so it wasn't hard to figure out that a quarter of women are assaulted in their college years. And I was saying that my senior year of high school at this elite prep school for all girls, who our whole time there was spent on so many beautiful things, including empowering us to go to the best college we could go to. And I was like, we're all girls and we're all going to college, and a quarter of girls who go to college are raped. So I don't understand. I still go back to that 18-year-old and I'm like, I wish somebody had just said, you're right, don't go. Because that was I was just like, what? No one's listening to me.
Yeah.
And so, what the truth is that they just didn't know what to say. And I had this one because it was true. Right. And I had this one aunt who really intentionally took me out to lunch that August before I went to college and said, something else is up here. You're more fearful about this than the average, just nervous to go to school. And I told her, I was like, and I've told other people this, like, I can't square this. What is this about? Everybody's celebrating us and we're going to all these good schools. These good schools have just as much assault, if not more, as any other school. I don't how I'm meant to think about this. And in so many ways, she didn't have the answers, but she also invited me to consider being involved in that work on college campus.
Wow.
So I went to college knowing that I wanted to be involved in trying to prevent and appropriately address sexual violence on college campuses, particularly my college campus. And that has informed so much of my life, truly, because it was unusual and to go to the club section and just know what table I was going to go to. And by the second semester of my first year, I was co-chair of that group, and I did a lot of work. It so informed my college years. And part of that work at the time, it was a very different landscape, actually, but we were the people on call for sexual assaults on campus.
Wow.
And so I heard a lot of stories. I did a lot of training around working with the different support systems in the local community and on campus. And it was way too much for college students to be doing.
Yeah, that's
And thankfully, that has really, the trend there has totally shifted. I mean, if you think about this is 15, 20 years before the Me Too movement. And so thankfully, we've really expanded our general consciousness around so much of this. And it seems like, at least in my college, and I know there are now professional staff who do the work that this student group that I was involved with used to do. Thank goodness, right?
yeah.
But but I actually experienced a sexual assault in college. And so that was quite a journey for me and took me many years to come into healing around, because I just was attached to so much of my pre assault identity, including that you don't have to care this deeply about sexual assault. You don't have to be assaulted to care this deeply about being sexually assaulted.
Mm.
And because I was asked for those early years before the assault, why do you care so much? To me, I just, clearly this is part of my life's work, and I didn't quite
Yeah.
understand that at
Like
18, but
weird
I was like,
question.
what a weird, and it was, do you want to tell me that, and it's just like, no, like, why don't more people hear about this? And so I kept that buried for 15 years.
Wow.
And at the same time, I was providing platforms for people to speak publicly and to be nurtured and nourished and heard and believed and validated. I just, for whatever complicated set of reasons, wasn't able to step into that for myself. And about 10 years ago now, that just came to a head, and I knew I needed to really come into a deeper level of understanding and peace with my own journey. And so I did a ton of healing work around it. Let me ping back one more step. So there's that thread.
Yeah.
And then the other sort of simultaneous thing that was happening at the time was that I had this awareness in my late 20s, early 30s about. Now they hold such a beautiful container. Thank you so much for giving me a space. I've spoken about all these things, but to speak about them in this container feels that much more beautiful.
Mm.
So thank you.
Awesome.
And I will just ping to say that I then was at college. I graduated. I went to go get a master's in gender studies. I was still very focused on issues of sexual violence. And at the end of my master's degree, was totally burnt out, and completely understandably so. And I shifted work completely, and I started selling tonic water, basically.
Wow.
And I was living in London, and I don't know if you all know this brand, but it was brand new at the time. It was called Fever Tree. They make all natural drink mixers. I was their first salesperson. I worked for them. I loved them. It was this break. It was just this break.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about sexual assault all day, every day. I didn't read and study and theorize. And
Mm.
they were beautiful co-founders who nurtured me professionally, and I loved it. It was a great experience. And 2 years later, I had been transferred to New York, and I just went through a bit of a depression because I was so far off from doing the work I'm meant to be doing. And I went through this battle of, but I can't go back. I can't talk about violence all day, every day anymore. I just can't do it. I know I can't do it. And at this point, I'm still 3-ish years before getting the help from my own healing. So I'm in that like swirl. And I had this like moment where I was like, okay, what do you really want? I want a world free of sexual violence. I went through this meditation, self-guided, in this tiny apartment in New York, and was like, okay, close your eyes, take some breaths. What does that world look like? And I just got to sit in that world without violence, and I just saw so much pleasure
Oh,
and so much joy and so much reverence for women's bodies and our orgasms and the power of our orgasms. And so that is what I left my job to go create. And that's
mm,
the work that I was trying to do from that perspective. I was trying to get engaged in adult content and erotic material with a real lens and reverence for women's sexual pleasure and orgasm. And that's the work that led me to be in circle with a bunch of really amazing entrepreneurial women who turned me on to embody living and how the cycle plays into everything that I was working with. And that was sort of the match of pleasure and the menstrual cycle. So
wow.
that was a long road back to your question.
No, I mean,
Um,
I'm so grateful to you for sharing these parts of your story. I know sometimes this stuff can be challenging to share because your story is going to be medicine for so many women, but it is also your story. It's real for you, you know? And so I just appreciate you opening up about the reality of your life and like what you've moved through and the sort of vulnerable parts of not wanting to share while simultaneously inviting other women to share, and then how you eventually got to that place yourself. And I really just first want to reflect to you like how kind of beautiful I think that your inclination to support with stopping and supporting women who experience sexual violence on college campuses is. I think that your initial fear of it, what I was thinking when you were sharing that, I was like, that seems like a really normal response to me for someone who is told the statistics that you were told. And so like maybe some people were like, why are you so nervous about this? But that seems to me like you were already just really connected with your body and like experiencing, wait, but if that's the statistic and I'm a woman and this is where I'm going, that seems like a healthy fear based on what you were fed. And it also like your inclination to go and help and support it just and like your deep inspiration and fear and all the emotions in it. It's you just deeply care about women. And like some of us are born with that purpose and that mission that we just want to be and need to be protectors of women. And that was
yeah.
like the first way you were called to do that. And you did it until it no longer served you because you have to protect yourself first in order to protect other women. And I just think that's so inspiring. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fun to think back. And I've had some really beautiful moments of being able to go back to my college campus and connect with some of the folks who are doing supportive work there and see how much it has evolved and to feel kind of smiling with that nod to this conversation we were having previously about the generational expansion of things, right? But to really celebrate that things are so different now and the
Yeah.
procedures are so different now. And I had this small group of women a couple of years ago just looking at me kind of wide-eyed, like, wait, what? There wasn't a a professional sexual assault response coordinator for you? Like,
You're like, no, it was
why?
me.
I was like, well, exactly. I was like, no, I helped the people. I responded. They were like, it's insane. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And this conversation is celebratory, and there's so much more work to do. So it's all there. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And how beautiful too to sort of like transform. It's like what we were saying about sex ed to go from it being this like preventative what not to do to what's actually possible on the like beautiful whole and like pleasure side of things. And so I think
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
like a natural transition. I love that's
Yeah.
where you went from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and before we finish, I we have 15 minutes, but I want to hear about your conception journey and like where that falls into your story in the timeline.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are getting both in the timeline and the conception story into the world of steaming
Oh yeah.
because
So when did steaming come
so
in too? That's yeah.
I go into this intentional healing. I basically had a podcast in 2015 that
Oh.
was focused on pleasure, and I interviewed the very dear and powerful Anita Kopacz in 2015, and she has such a beautiful healing story. And she was one of the first women that I had really experienced whom I believed and connected to when she said she had come to a place of sincere gratitude for everything that had been on her path because it is where she is now and she is content and in joy about where she is now.
Wow.
And I noticed that I just had this like belief in that and then this awe and then this like craving for it. Like it was just something I really wanted for myself. And at the
Mhm.
time, I felt like I hadn't seen that. I hadn't seen a way to have had these experiences and to come into wholeness and acceptance and empowerment. And so that was really the striking moment for me that sent me actually to Peru, where I worked for a month with a variety of plant medicines, primarily ayahuasca and San Pedro Huachuma,
Mhm.
and a very beloved plant medicine practitioner who guided me through some really important healing around that. And I came back in a completely shifted relationship to my body and to all of the experiences that I've journeyed with her on.
Mhm.
And I learned about steaming. I was speaking to a couple of our team members about doing this interview, and we were laughing about how the truth is most people actually have heard about steaming in different ways
Mm.
before the first time they hear about steaming. And
Okay,
I
yeah, say
realized,
more.
right? So, so of course that can't be true, and it's true. So I say often the first time I heard about steaming, because in a way this is true, was at this female sexuality workshop in Boulder, Colorado in 2017. That is true. That's the first time I heard about it in a way that had me really be in reaction to it. But
Yeah.
when I think back, I knew women who were seeing it then. So I had heard about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. But it didn't connect and
this doesn't connect. There's a moment
yeah.
where you like connect. And I had this activating moment of all places at this female ejaculation workshop that I went to while I was studying pleasure, into my path of healing, well into being open to all sorts of modalities.
Yeah.
And I'm driving home and I'm catching myself with thoughts of judging the women who were talking about Yoni steaming. I'm like full on those women. So weird. And then I just start to myself because I'm like, you, you were at the female ejaculation workshop, and now you're this is hilarious. Patriarchy's grasp is so strong. So
Yep.
it like just kept coming
Yep.
to me. It's so strong. It just convinced you for a good 15 minutes, Kit Maloney, that like steaming is what's
This
too
is
weird.
crazy and weird.
That's just too out there. So then I got really interested and was like, I got to do this thing that like created that defensive-ness in me and that reaction. Like I'm now like fascinated. So I steamed with a practitioner a couple days later, and then that I mean, quite literally changed my life in so many ways because now it changed my profession but it changed my relationship with my body. And after doing so much healing work, that first steam unlocked something
Mm,
in me. It shifted trauma. It released a different layer. It brought me into divine feminine in a way that I had not yet experienced. This invitation to really be with the truth that gentle is strong and
mm.
powerful and resourced. And it's just like that is steam to me. And so I just started studying and learning and practicing and noticing the shifts in my whole body, but I could no longer go without tracking my cycle. At that point, I pretty much was, but I had no way of gauging it other than tracking because I no longer had any lower back pain after I started. I mean, that was
Mhm.
wild to me. I steamed for like maybe 3 times in that next bleed, no lower back pain. It took me longer to clear out the brown blood that I had become accustomed to and had been told for 20 plus years was normal, common, not normal. I've
Right.
now come to understand.
Exactly.
But so I was steaming and then I started Katara, and then I was in my late 30s and I was finding it really hard to hold myself in this culture, as knowing that of course I was still fertile, but feeling feeling the victimy of, did I wait too long to have
Mm,
kids? Is this taking too long? Should I just, because I'm in my late 30s, should I just jump head on into the more intense invasive procedures, not wanting to, being really with the rush of it. So, in my training and also in holding women, I really do believe that steaming for fertility, it's really important to give yourself at least 3, if not 6 months, to really
mhm.
be with the cycle, focus on its health, steam most days that you're not bleeding,
Yeah.
be with your body, hear her messages, understand what she's needing from you and what it's bringing up for you about wanting to conceive, which within all of us, there's a lot there. So I was rushing and rushing. And ironically, I was, the practitioner not following my own protocol. And so at one point, I did the split personality thing and was like, I gave myself a consultation
I love
and
that.
like wrote myself a steaming schedule.
I've done that for myself too.
Right. I'm like, oh my goodness, because I need to have somebody tell me what to do. So it's just got to be a different
Yes.
part of me so I can follow it. And the 2 times I did my protocol, I had ease with getting pregnant, actually.
Wow.
The journey was challenging. I was actually pregnant 3 times in my late 30s and early 40s. I lost the first pregnancy. That was harder than I ever understood.
Yeah.
I was beyond humbling. I really deeply thought at times it would just break me. And I'm so grateful to Steam because it brought me home and it brought me back to the trust of my body again. And that was really scary and hard at times. And as soon as I would sit down, that fear would be released, right? Like that is, I still to this day so often resist steaming. And the thoughts
Yeah.
before I start steaming are, oh, why bother? Just it's crazy what the, and I think what my ego is trying to do is protect me from feeling my feelings because we think they'll be too much. And they're
Yes.
not too much. They're just our feelings. Once you sit down and once you hear the womb, it's so full of love
Yeah.
that, there's nothing to fear. But until you really sit down, it's that swirl of the resistance and the what if, and it's just wild what the mind will tell you. So steaming was so important to me for that. I'm super grateful to have had really wonderful postpartum journeys, and I did a lot of steaming through them. I never had a postpartum journey that I didn't steam because I had already come to steaming once I started to have babies, so I don't have a counterpoint there, but I will say that it just was such a nourishing practice to me, and I'm very fortunate to. I was very concerned. I feel like I have a lot of indicators that would put me in a risk profile for postpartum depression. And so I was
Mhm.
very cognizant of taking that very seriously and being very intentional about getting support. And I'm so grateful because I had really beautiful postpartum experiences with a ton of support, doubled up on the support of what most people think
Yeah. What did you
possible.
create for
So,
yourself other than steaming? What did you do?
um, so I run my own company, so I made sure that I was really clear with anybody working with me that I needed a lot of time off and that we needed to have certain ways to be in touch with me and to
Mhm.
not be in touch with me. And that was done before my son, but it took a lot more work before my daughter because the company was bigger. And because I also had at the time then a 1 year old and a newborn.
Yeah,
So
it's a
there
lot.
was a lot more going on.
Yeah.
And so the preparation time for that though was intentional for I prepared for that with new hires and stuff for about 3.5 months before she was born. And
Nice.
in hindsight, I probably should have started 6 months earlier. And because everything magically dropped in, but like kind of just in the right timing, not with a day more. So that's why I'm like, if
A
I
little
had a
longer,
third, it
maybe.
probably would start. Exactly. So, and then I had a postpartum doula. I had somebody helping around the house. My husband was able to be more prepared this second time too and was really focused on being at home. And I just gave myself a lot of space
Yeah.
to be inside and with my baby. And it's really interesting. This is like a ping to different threads of our conversation, but there is that going out with the baby, and like it's so sweet to go to coffee shops and cafes and stuff and see super little babies. But I really have noticed like a different reaction. And in my 20s or 30s, I might have been like, wow, that mom is such a badass to be like out and right. And now I'm like, did you need to be the one to get the coffee?
Totally.
I'm like, if this is what you needed today, great. If you needed some fresh
Yeah.
air, and like
And
this is great. But also,
are you
somebody needs to
okay?
be, are you okay? Exactly. so,
Totally.
so it was really wonderful. And yes, I have a ton of privilege to activate it, but I harnessed the ability to be like, I was not grocery shopping, for weeks, if not months. I was not doing the tasks. I was able to really be with the baby because that is a full-time job. And my
Yeah.
body is giving her the entire nourishment that she needs to sustain herself with. So people can cook for me and bring me beautiful food and sit with me and love me
Hmm.
up, which was really needed. So got a lot
Yeah.
to say about postpartum, but steaming has that was a super important thing because it's something that we are able to do for ourselves. And it's
Hmm.
quiet, and somebody else can hold the baby, and somebody else can set it up and clean it up for you. And it's this just moment where you have to nourish yourself and honor your body for what she's just journeyed through. And I
Yeah.
think so much of the issues that can come up in postpartum is thematic to not allowing ourselves that space,
Hmm.
right? So I think the steam is, of course, super powerful in the steam, but even if you were doing all of those things and you somehow weren't steaming, it would have a huge benefit basically at any time, but certainly in postpartum when you just get to be with yourself in gratitude, right? Like that
Yeah.
is what we need prescriptions for. So.
Yeah, I mean, so much resonance with what you shared. I love hearing about like the conception, how steaming supported you in conception and in postpartum, the sort of the bookends of your
Mhm.
reproductive journey. And
Mhm.
one of the like things I just wanted to pull out from what you said at the beginning when you started talking about like the first time you steamed, which gosh, like I should be asking women about what happened the first time they steamed on this podcast because that's like such a big topic. I'm like, that was such a monumental moment for me too. I was like, whoa, my pelvis can relax that much. Like,
Exactly. Yes.
like so huge. But what I loved that you, yeah, like that was such a big thing for me. But I love what you said was like, I'm gonna butcher the exact quote, but you said something like, the healing can be gentle, or like the gentle is what is healing. And gosh, I mean, I've shared this on other episodes, but I used to think, like I started steaming because I needed a way to connect with my body and I had really painful periods. But I had been trying to do all these really intense, like crystal wand practices. And like sometimes that is part of my journey now. But like at the beginning, I like the gentleness was the most healing, the like really gentle steam coming in and like softening those tissues and like bringing me to myself. And I love how you speak to it in postpartum too, because it's like, I work one on one with clients and often for fertility. And one of the benefits that they see from steaming is, of course, like cycle regulation, helping ease painful periods, increasing fertility, all of these things. It has all of these benefits. But I just had a client yesterday and she's, the steaming is so nice. It gives me time to myself that I don't get any other time. And it's just like that
Yes.
nervous system, like rooting that happens when you sit on the steam is so powerful. So thank you for
Yes.
speaking to that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And thank you to that client of yours
Yeah.
for being in the practice and allowing herself that time.
Yeah.
And that's just not offered on the table for so many women when they're on their conception journey. And that, again, like it's the steam is so wonderful, but also it's what is happening around us in
Mhm.
it as well. It's the claiming of the time. It's the claiming that it's important to go inside the body and
Mhm.
let her know that this is the intention
Yeah.
is to get pregnant. That in of itself is a big dialogue to have.
Oh,
Certainly,
yeah.
if you have things come up for you, if you terminated pregnancies at different times, or if you've lost wanted pregnancies, the body needs to know you're up for this. This is the intention, and to hold that with you and for you can be so important and so helpful. And it can seem so scary. And then you sit on the steam and it just
Mhm.
softens you into the truth of the womb, which is always grounded in some thread of love. So
Yeah. Yeah. Like it brings you home. It's really what it
yeah,
is, I feel. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We have to wrap up, but I love to ask at the end. And I always say this because I'm like, you've already shared so much wisdom with us. But if there's one more piece of womb wisdom that you'd like to leave with the women listening, what might that be today?
Mhm. I think it's just to remember to breathe into the womb and
Mm.
to really center your relationship with her. And that's it. And everything comes from there.
Yeah, it really is so simple, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, steam's so simple, and then it's even more simple than that, right? It's just breathing into her, and then that is what makes the other things feel simple. And it can seem overwhelming and exhausting in some ways to live this differently from the overculture, but actually it's actually really simple and
Yeah.
it's actually really nourishing. And so yeah, yeah.
Mm. Thanks, Kit. I would love for you to share, where women can find you and your beautiful products and
Yeah,
yeah, whatever
thank
you want to
you.
share in that regard.
Yeah, so home base is kataralove.com, and we have a variety of products and services to support you in womb steaming, yoni steaming at home, wombing at home. I
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
actually.
That's it.
Um, and so, yeah, we've got some seeds and 6 custom herbal blends that I've designed, and a bunch of beautiful accessories to add some ritual and extra yumminess to the practice. And then over at Instagram, we're at Be by Katara. And if you're listening, your first order with Katara, definitely take advantage of Natalie's discount code, which is Moon Baby Love. And that will get you 10% off your first order. So that would be really special. But I am now, my daughter is 10 and a half months old, and I'm like stepping back into the socials. And so I'm over on Instagram just a little bit more each week, and I'm really loving it. So feel free to say hi, and we would love that. We'd absolutely love that. To be engaged in these conversations is so special. And it's been really wonderful to be coming back into the world through being on shows like this. And again, the space that you've created here is really beautiful.
Oh,
Beautiful. Thank you.
thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such an honor to have you on and bear witness to your stories and hear just like the amazing journey that you've been on to becoming the woman you are today. And it's really
Mm.
inspiring for me. I know it's going to be inspiring for so many women. And hopefully, if you're listening and you haven't begun your yoni steaming practice yet, this is like a
Yeah.
little nudge to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, kid. It's been such an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly such an honor to bring these stories forward to you, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it could reach more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to join our online community, the Cyclical Living Circle, in the show notes below. There, you'll also find the links to book one-on-one virtual sessions, shop the herbal shop, and any group programs that I'm currently offering. Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, and I love to connect with you all there. All right, see you next week.